This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Barricade 2 herbicide from FMC. Barricade 2 herbicide destroys tough broadleaf weeds like narrow-leaved hawksbeard, cleavers, night-flowering catchfly, and kochia without compromising the safety of your cereal crop. Barricade 2 herbicide. Tough on weeds, gentle on crops.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast in Canada, the U.S., or even beyond the borders of North America. It's great to have everybody here and tuning in. We got a fun show for you here today. We're going to talk about some heady issues. We're going to talk to Carlo Dade. He is with the Canada West Foundation. He's going to be joined by Anthony Rosborough, who is a law and computer science professor at the Dalhousie University in Eastern Canada. And we're going to talk about Bill C-294. This has to do with interoperability. We're also going to hear today from Jordan Underhill. He is the founder of the Canadian Dairy XPO. It's back for another season, so Bern Tobin of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with him. What's on tap for this year's event? And we're going to hear from Steve Verheul. Now, Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with Steve, as did I at the CFA meeting. And like a week later, Kelvin had the fortunate opportunity to run into Steve again at another conference. It was the Crops Convention in Winnipeg. Now, if you have any feedback, comments, questions, thoughts, the burr under your saddle, so to speak, I really, really want to hear from you. Okay, I'll be honest with you, RealAg Radio audience. Your commentary comes in flurries, and then there's droughts, and then there's I'm always interested in what sparks you trying to provide your feedback. I don't have to read your name on the air. I don't have to say your name. I want to hear from you and hear what you have to say. Just like when I do my keynotes, my speeches. You can't, I can't keep you away from the mic. You have so many thoughts when we're there in person. So let's get it going here on the interaction. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or you are more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. That is 855-776-6147. Now, in some keynotes here the last couple of months, I always talk about, what are some of the issues that are impacting our industry, and one of the topics, of course, is trade. I'm passionate about it. I was a little bit surprised that only 52% of Canadian producers feel that trade has a positive impact on their operations. That to me sounds really low. And I got a story up on RealAgriculture.com about that. But in my keynotes, when we're talking about trade, one of the things that I have mentioned is Bill 282. Now, this is the bill that is looking to, through legislation, prevent Canadian trade negotiators from giving up any more access on supply management. So eggs, poultry, and of course dairy. And although this private member's bill out of Quebec has the best of intentions, okay? And I always have to preface this with audiences. I am not saying anything negative here towards supply management. I'm also not speaking for supply management. My commentary or my thoughts are particular to Bill 282. And my thoughts this is really, although I understand the intention, and every country has its sacred cows, so to speak. The U.S., it's sugar. Canada, it's supply management. Every country or region has those things they try to protect, okay? This is a terrible idea. A really bad idea. And I really think that we need to reconsider what exactly we're doing here. Now, we know that it's highly likely, based on what we've heard from Steve Verheul in past interviews, that the U.S. is looking to make some changes. Look at what's happening with the Product USA labeling, okay? So they're looking to make some changes. And Steve had said to us, to me in that interview, dispute resolution being one of them, which is really interesting because that was the piece that was supposed to be this big improvement over the former NAFTA agreement. And this dispute resolution process was what the U.S. had actually pushed for. Interestingly enough. And now we're not happy about it because we didn't win. When I say the U.S. did not win the dairy dispute on the allocation of TRQs. So if we lost, it must be wrong. It needs to be fixed. So the U.S. is concerned about that. So the way that Canada is intending to protect itself from the U.S. coming after more dairy market access at a time where the U.S. dairy farmer has had profitability struggles, has not been a great time in the dairy industry in the U.S. We're going to be coming off an election. The U.S. is coming for more dairy access. And I believe that to be the case. And so it's sort of like what I've been telling audiences. It's Canada's naivety here is to walk into the negotiating room and to say, oh, yeah, you know what? Oh, man. Oh, I'm really sorry. Oh, shoot. I know you want more dairy market access, but see, we got this thing, this new piece of legislation where I can't give you any. It's off the table. I'm sorry. I can't. Think about that. And what I'm hearing from people south of the border is that all legislation like this would actually make the U.S. want that market access even more. They would pedal down on it, so to speak, to use some of my terminology. And it's sort of like, you know, when your kid says, "Hey, mommy, I'd like a cookie," or "Hey, mommy," maybe it's not mommy, it's like a bit of British. "Hey, dad," or "Hey, mom, can I go out on Saturday night?" And you say, "Nah, you can't. No, sorry. You got chores in the morning, or, you know, too many cookies are bad for your teeth. Whatever. You can't." What is that kid? What happens with that kid? When we're told no, we actually want it more. And the fact that we were told no, it actually creates this impulse in us to actually crave that more because we can't actually have it. That's what's at work here. This is what the situation that Canada is setting up. So, should we be giving up more dairy market or more market access to supply managed products in future trade agreements with the U.S. or any country? I don't know. That's not the point. Whether we should or we shouldn't. We may have to. We may not have to. But to have this level of naivety that this piece of flimsy legislation that politicians that even voted for it, and like this, a Steve Verheul type that was a trade negotiator, says it's nothing but political positioning at best. What are we doing? Think about the waste of time this is on the legislative calendar, not only in the House of Commons but also in the Senate. So I think Bill 282, no matter what you think about supply management, is a really not a great idea for Canada to be pursuing. And I think it's something that we need to kind of drop, put away, and just shut up about it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. S. Haney at RealAgriculture.com. Okay, when we come back, we're going to hear from Carlo Dade of Canada West Foundation and Anthony Rosborough. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. You know, Co-op knows your community because, well, quite frankly, they live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more by going to Co-op's website, co-op.crs/farm, or just Google Co-op. Okay, we're now going to hear about Bill C-294, and it's about interoperability. Okay, and this is the ability for short lines to be able to continue to innovate into the future, and their ability to, we're going to cut into this, but essentially there are digital locks in place, and you need to be able to break those digital locks that are put on pieces of technology in order to figure out how you connect to them. And here to discuss it is Anthony Rosborough. He's assistant professor at Dalhousie University. He's in the Law and Computer Science Department. Also, Carlo Dade with Canada West Foundation. Carlo, maybe give us an update on where we're at with Bill C-294. This is the bill that has to do with interoperability. Give us an update because it's in the Senate, I guess maybe stuck is one way to put it.
Yeah, so the bill, which, as you mentioned, interoperability, it's to get headers and other equipment to ensure that the small manufacturers on the prairies, the honeybees, the MacDowns, that their equipment can continue to work with Deere, Case, combines, tractors, etc. You remember the threat was that John Deere's X9, the new super-duper combine, they locked down the software. And we had been worried that this would happen, and that these small manufacturers would be basically shut out, and farmers would lack choice. Producers would lack choice in which equipment they could use with the mainline platforms. So the bill to assure that this didn't happen, to mandate interoperability, that the manufacturers, the short line manufacturers, could make equipment that worked with the combines and tractors by granting them access to the software, made it through the House. And again, it's a very limited exception. Anthony can talk more detail about the legal technicalities, but an exception to allow just these manufacturers to be able to continue to make equipment. That passed the House by an overwhelming majority. It was delayed coming out of the House because the NDP and the Bloc wanted time to speak in favor of it. So when was the last time you saw a Bloc MP stand up and thank a colleague from Western Canada for introducing legislation and saying they wanted to support it? But that's what happened with this bill. But now it's in the Senate. It made it through first reading, but there's no clear prognosis for it emerging from the Senate. And it's fallen victim to the other issues that crowd the agenda in the Senate. So it really didn't get the same love in the Senate, especially from prairie senators, that it did in the House. But we're still hopeful. There's time to work on this. There's time to educate. And there's time for farmers and producers to contact people and say, hey, what's happening with this?
So, Anthony, from a legal perspective, why is it important for this legislation to pass?
Yeah, I think so. One starting point, I guess, is that, copyright protects software. So access to software is something where copyright can prevent your access through something known as digital locks, or what the Copyright Act calls TPM, different tools, the different sort of names for these same things. But Copyright Act back in the early 2010s was amended to include protection for these digital locks. And the purpose at that time was to prevent, piracy of music and films. But as more and more objects in our world become, essentially computerized devices, including ag equipment, what happens is that copyright, those rules of accessing software, start to kind of find their way into more and more things of the world. So we've seen this with repair, obviously, with access to software preventing access to diagnosis information. But this also applies in the case of making two devices work together. So in the case of the shortline industry in Canada, trying to get a header to work with a combine requires access to that software. And so that's the type of interoperability we're talking about here. And this is why an exception is needed under the Act, because currently, without Bill C-294, if a shortline company wants to force interoperability between two devices, it needs to essentially break those digital locks or find a way around them. And that could be very unlawful depending on the circumstances. And so this bill at least makes it lawful for that type of activity to happen.
So currently, basically those short lines would have to seek some sort of like side deal with the OEM, or basically essentially break the law by breaking the digital lock. Is that correct?
Yeah, currently there are very narrow, very small list of exceptions that would permit circumvention of a digital lock without the consent of the manufacturer or the rights holder in this case, because we're talking about copyright and software. And yeah, for what the short line is doing, there's no exception currently that deals with physical devices. There is an interoperability exception currently in the Act, but it deals purely with just two software applications. It doesn't envision this type of interoperability, which is two computerized devices, right, that need to speak the same language. So this exception is essentially, building on top of the interoperability exception that's currently in the Act to make it apply to situations where we've got physical computerized devices that need to talk to one another.
And yet, even if you do manage to make it work, the next mandatory upgrade from the manufacturer wipes it out, and you're back to square one. So that's, yeah.
So Canada's current environment related to this issue, how does it compare to other countries, the U.S., South America, or Europe? Because this same issue comes up. So is our current, are we more restrictive, or are we kind of in line with everybody? Give us a comparison to other countries.
Yeah, so without boring you to death on those, those details.
In layman's terms and quickly.
Yeah. Well, so let's compare it to the U.S. I think the U.S. is the easiest comparison. So in the U.S., we treat the situation in the same way, but in terms of creating an exception to allow the short line to work in that jurisdiction, they have an exemption process. So every 3 years, they sit down and they look at different cases, literal like purposes for circumvention, and grant periodic exemptions. So in the U.S., there could be an exemption granted for 3 years for interoperability and innovation in the short-line agricultural equipment sector. And that would just apply carte blanche, But in Canada, we don't have this periodic exemption like we see in the U.S. We have a very closed list of exceptions for specific purposes. So it's a different approach altogether to how to create openness in the system. So we have to actually amend the Copyright Act to have the same effect. Whereas, in the U.S., they can have more of like an administrative periodic review. So that's one way that we are very different. And also, we are similar in many ways in that in the U.S., what they're talking about is that just even accessing software, in cracking a digital lock to just get at the software, not talking about reproducing it or selling it or communicating it online or whatever, just accessing the software and it's circumventing a digital lock to do it is unlawful. And so in that way, Canada is like the U.S. In Europe, they generally treat TPMs or digital locks as things that have to be connected to copyright in some way. So if you were to circumvent a digital lock for some purpose that had nothing to do with copying or distributing it or communicating online, then that would be fine. So Canada in some ways borrows like kind of the worst of both worlds, right? In the sense that we have a really limited way to create exceptions and we have very high standard of protection. Hope that's not too boring.
I don't have a look of shock on my face because I'm wondering if that's what you were going to kind of say. So, Carlo, we've got short lines, and I think when I think of some of the innovation on the manufacturing side coming out of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, you mentioned that prairie senators are not necessarily seem as motivated or as excited about this as maybe you thought they would be, and maybe their fellow peers in the South. Or sorry, in the House, not the South, the House. Why?
So I think
what's driving that lack of the sort of high level of apathy?
I don't know if it's apathy or it's just a crowded schedule. You've got pharmacare, online harms. There are a number of issues that would crowd. Yeah, and 234, you've got a number of issues that would really crowd the Senate plate. I just think it may be that. I would like to think that it's that, and we just need on our end to do a bit more education. But this bill not only, as Anthony mentioned, corrects the problem in Canada, it gives us, I think, a strategic and competitive advantage over the U.S. in that if you have a change in law, you have certainty. In the U.S., you're going to make investments from the business side based on a 3-year exemption and crossing your fingers that you get another exemption. So I think that kind of stifles the creativity in the industry. Are you going to make investments for something that may get yanked out from under you, setting up manufacturing or setting up a business or making major investments in innovation or research, if you think your ability to do so will get yanked out from under you in 2 years, 2.5 years. In Canada, if we have the permanent change, then business has the certainty to be able to invest to continue the process.
Any studies done in terms of the potential economic losses if we don't move forward on 294? Do we have any info on that?
Fortunately, prairies can. What was formerly Western Economic Diversification did do an economic impact study, and that's available. There's a link to it in the policy brief that Anthony and I just wrote. There's also links to it online, and they did their best to estimate it. But again, as with so many things, we run into problems with data, and you see this in our policy brief. We're relying on StatCan for data. And there are gaps in the data, especially when you get down to something as specific as ag equipment manufacturing. So it's hard to tell, but we do know that there are tens of thousands of jobs, and AMC, the ag manufacturing group, estimates that it's $8 billion a year. But you go to Frontier, Saskatchewan, and think about that's corner of Saskatchewan. What happens if you lose 200 manufacturing, middle-class manufacturing jobs in that corner of the province?
So, Carlo, as we try to better understand here this situation, then what ifs are can be cloudy. But if C-294 doesn't happen, what in your estimation, what does it mean for some of the short-line manufacturers in Canada?
It's an existential question. I mean, can you afford to continue to make massive investments in equipment, in research, in hiring and training folks, if you're under a constant threat that the equipment manufacturers, the Deeres, the Cases, the Hollands, the IHs will charge you with copyright infringement? Now, if you're a short line manufacturer, you can't afford to buy every combine and every tractor so that you, in essence, have the equipment with the software and then you have a right to hack it. That business model just doesn't work. I mean, there's not a short line manufacturer that could afford to buy and own every piece of equipment. So it would really call into question the existence of the industry in Canada. And again, 200 jobs in Frontier. I don't know how many thousand jobs or hundreds of jobs in Winnipeg and Macdon. You would lose this center for innovation and creativity on the Canadian prairies.
Hey, guys, really appreciate you discussing it with us here at Real Agriculture. Anthony, it was great to meet you. And Carlo, great to see you again, as always.
Pleasure.
Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. XITEBIO.ca. So if you were thinking about soybeans there in the Midwest, consider Excite Bio to launch those yields higher. We'll be back with more of Real Ag Radio. Up next, we're talking to Jordan Underhill of the Canadian Dairy XPO right after this.
Want a product that will give you nitrogen all season long? Then you want to try Envita. Envita gets directly into the cells of the plants, and it's easy to apply, foliar or in furrow. Envita provides the flexibility you need for your farm practices. Whether you want to reduce your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain your nitrogen and increase yield, Envita fits your farm. Envita SC formulation is OMRI registered. To learn more about Envita, visit azotic.com. That's AZOTIC.com.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Back to Real Ag Radio. I want to tell you about the pre-emergent soil active herbicide like Valterra EZ and Fierce EZ from New Farm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray after spring thaw for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control this spring. Find out more about New Farm products by going to newfarm.ca. Well, coming up here very, very quickly is the Canadian Dairy XPO. Bern Tobin of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with Jordan Underhill. He is the founder of this great Canadian dairy farm show, and here's what they had to say.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to Real Agriculture. Well, April is almost here, and that means I'll soon be heading to Stratford, Ontario, along with thousands of dairy farmers to take in the Canadian Dairy XPO. The annual dairy industry showcase takes place on April 3rd and 4th. And to talk about what producers will see and experience, I'm now joined by Canadian Dairy XPO owner-operator Jordan Underhill. Hi, Jordan. Hey, great to have you on Real Agriculture.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, hey, it's been 10 years now. You're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the show this year. You know, you're coming off record attendance. Almost 17,000 people attended the show in 2023. When you look back at the last decade, what do you tell people about your show? What part does it now play in the Canadian dairy industry?
Yeah, it's very interesting to look back and think about the original pitch to industry in the city of Stratford, that we were going to create this national showcase that was going to take over the city of Stratford, and the dairy industry was going to take over the city of Stratford for that first week of April. And now we're here. So, I think the Canadian Dairy XPO has really become the national showcase of an amazing industry for the world. And for that, we're proud of that.
Yeah. Hey, now, to commemorate the 10th anniversary, you're launching the Canadian Dairy Business Summit. It's billed as a one-day CEO training for dairy producers on April 2nd, the day before the doors open, shall we say. You've got an impressive lineup of speakers and an agenda here. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we had education pieces within the Canadian Dairy XPO over the last 10 years. And of course, there's so many things happening at the show, from cows to robots to social activities. And so we decided to pull that out and kind of expand it for the 10th anniversary at the new Tom Pattison Theatre, which is a world-class facility on the river in Stratford, 5 minutes from the site. And make it focused around business. I mean, if you go onto these dairy operations, they don't need to be told about heifer calf development, ruminant nutrition, etc. They're the experts in those animal science categories. But a lot of them haven't had business training like us as business owners would typically do. So yeah, 1 day CEO training, everything from negotiating to contract law to investment diversification. And that theme will carry on for the next number of years.
Awesome. Hey, pretty exciting stuff. Hey, let's turn our attention to the trade show. You have, more than 300 exhibitors from 35 countries. I know the German pavilion is back. I spent some time there last year. Always tremendous innovation here. What can producers expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, the show can only take so much credit for this. The Canadian dairy industry is so vibrant, which stimulates innovation. And so we're just the platform to showcase that innovation. The German pavilion that was new in 2023 is expanded for this year. More robotic technology than ever, and just lots of information sharing. So it's on an annual basis, it really amazes me how far we come in 1 year as far as knowledge and innovation in the dairy industry.
Yeah, you've got robotics in motion, so that's a lot of companies down in the Cow Coliseum showcasing all kinds of robotics. You've also got genetics in motion. Now that's live. Dairy Daughters on display, showcased by Canada's elite genetic companies.
Yeah, so the robotics in motion, we've seen that evolve as well from the traditional box style robots into robotic technologies that revolve around parlor systems, so operations can expand more efficiently, as of course there's consolidation in this market like everywhere. And then the genetics in motion, we'll have 4 companies this year. Last number of years we've had 3. So Blonde and Sires joins the lineup with East Gen Select and ST. So it will be the largest showcase of Dairy Daughters live in the country. And again, something we're proud of. Farmers love looking at udders. And some of those companies have also engaged in the Calves for a Cause sale as well to support that.
Yeah, I was going to say you're also proud of the Calves for a Cause sale. Tell us a little bit more about that. It's always a buzz. It's broadcast on YouTube again this year?
Yeah, so it'll be on YouTube, also on DLMS Live. Last year, we took the average from, I think it was 3,200 to 65. And the plan is to climb up to closer to 10,000 on about 45 live lots and about the same frozen. The only difference is this year, the frozen lots will be available to bid on over a 4-day period on FarmGate, timedauctions.ca. And then the live auction will be on the Tuesday night, which is April the 3rd, starting at 6 o'clock. And again, all the proceeds are going to the Children's Hospital, which is an amazing cause.
And we can't not have a CDX conversation without Cheese Fest.
Yeah, so Cheese Fest, we're ramping it up a bit this year. We got J.D. Bixby is performing. He's a Canadian Idol finalist, as well as a DJ doing kind of a mashup of music. And so that will run between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the Tuesday. And then 6 o'clock, we jump right into the sale. So lots of cheese, lots of entertainment, an amazing kind of magical combination of consumers, producers, and industry at that Cheese Fest event. Totally free to attend.
Hey, final thing, tickets, information, where do producers go?
DairyExpo.ca has all the event information and also tickets for the trade show itself and also for the Dairy Business Summit as well.
Great stuff, Jordan. Canadian Dairy Expo takes place the 3rd and the 4th in Stratford. Sir, we'll see you there.
See you at the show.
That was Jordan Underhill, founder of the Canadian Dairy Expo. Vaderstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you to maximize yield. To learn more and find your local dealer, visit vaderstad.com. Up next on RealAg Radio, Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture is going to have a conversation with former Canadian trade negotiator Steve Verheul. You're listening to RealAg Radio. Of course, we're on Rural Radio 147.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. For balanced nutrition with micronutrients, the best answer is Wolftrax DDP from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Wolftrax can ensure nutrient availability through a crop's growth cycle, visit kochag.ca.
Pleased to be joined once again by Steve Verheul, former chief negotiator, trade negotiator for Canada. And Steve, coming off your presentation here at the crop convention, a lot of, I don't know if I want to say pessimism, but not a lot of optimism when it comes to the trajectory of global trade right now when it comes to protectionism and countries moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we're seeing a real movement away from the dedication to trade liberalization, the rules-based approaches we have at the WTO and in our bilateral agreements, less respect for those, and I think we're moving in a direction where we are seeing a lot more protectionism and a lot more industrial strategy, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. There are lots of examples, but I think the question that a lot of people are asking is, what can we do about it, or what are the reasons for optimism or hope that this trajectory can be reversed, that this course can be changed? Is there a place for Canada in that?
I think there's a significant place for Canada in that, because I think for the U.S. and some of the other larger countries that have been the ones that are largely responsible for moving away from trade rules, that's not where Canada wants to go. As a mid-sized country, we rely on trade rules to keep the game fair and to give us access to other markets that's more secure. But there are many countries in the same kind of position. Most of the countries that are mid-sized depend on trade, want to expand their trade, and want to be protected from the larger countries just being able to do whatever they want to do. So there's a big constituency out there, I think.
What would some examples be, or name some country names?
Well, I think there are a lot, and we've worked with them in the past, particularly at the WTO, because we've had common cause. So it's everyone from Norway, Switzerland in Europe, and some others, Australia, New Zealand, most definitely, some others in Southeast Asia. We've got allies in Latin America and Central America, countries, again, that rely on trade and need to have those rules in place.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of political uncertainty right now as well with, one of the speakers today said over half the world is potentially going to the polls in 2024. Do you expect that some of this may calm down, or that there could be a settling down after this election cycle is completed?
Well, it's a little unclear. I think it largely depends on what happens in the U.S. Because that's the election everybody is really watching. And if we do see a re-election of Trump, then we're likely to see some more disruption to the usual world order. He's talked about an across-the-board tariff of 10%. He's talked about being able to match tariffs of other countries. And those kinds of ideas, if they come to pass, breach every single trade agreement that the U.S. is a party to.
Mm-hmm. The problem there is, I guess, there isn't much for enforcement mechanisms at this point.
Well, yes, and we go back to the U.S. in that case because they are the ones that are not approving the appointment of appellate body members to the WTO, so the WTO dispute settlement system is completely ineffective. And the U.S. has found, unlike in the past, that the existing rules, even in the new NAFTA, can be kind of cumbersome at times, and they'd rather just not follow those rules.
Yeah. Well, even if we see the other scenario in the U.S. election, the current administration hasn't necessarily been pro-trade or out there signing trade deals and moving an agenda looking outside the country in that way either.
No, even with the Biden administration, it's been very much America first, focused on the domestic economy, not paying a lot of attention to what's going on in the rest of the world, not wanting to show a leadership role. So yeah, it's not as if one track is great for us and the other track isn't. Both tracks are problematic and we have to deal with them. But I think what concerns us the most is that the division within the U.S., which really makes any kind of leadership effort from the U.S. very difficult because the situation is so volatile. You've got the country virtually split in half in terms of views, and very difficult to get a national consensus on where to go.
Yeah. In many ways, you would have been kind of the captain of Team Canada last time around. That Team Canada approach has been renewed. Do you see that approach having the same effectiveness as it did last time around in terms of raising awareness about the importance of trade in individual jurisdictions in the U.S.?
Well, that is the approach that's being followed. They're preparing all the groundwork to be able to demonstrate on a state level, municipal level in some cases, with congressmen, with government representatives in the U.S., with think tanks, with media, all in an effort to demonstrate how important Canada is to the U.S. The additional element that is more prominent this time is that they're also emphasizing the security element, how important we are to U.S. economic security, U.S. national security, infrastructure, supply chains, those kinds of things, part of which has come out of COVID, of course.
The whole friendshoring concept.
Oh, exactly.
Are you a fan of friendshoring, or is that something you believe in?
Well, not exactly, no. I mean, I can understand why countries with common values would want to trade mostly with each other, and to some extent that certainly makes sense. But for a country like Canada, we export to almost every country in the world. If we start narrowing down our market and the countries we trade with, that's going to have a pretty big hit on our economic potential.
Yeah. So, in terms of Canada building this coalition of like-minded countries or countries with similar interests, do you think that coalition could effectively potentially get the U.S. back on board in terms of looking beyond its borders on the trade front?
I think that's possible. If that kind of effort could get some traction and start to put together some ideas that would be viable, and then I think certainly the U.S., it would be easier for the U.S. to then join that kind of effort than initiate it on its own. And I think the European Union would also welcome an effort like that too, and be very eager to get on board. I just don't think the U.S., the EU, others are in a position to show leadership right now, so it's got to come from somewhere.
Okay. Do you fear that the costs of protectionism need to become greater than they are already before some of these countries and the political willpower will be there to go back to having more of a coalition or multilateral approach?
Well, I hate to think how far it might need to go in order to do that, particularly because protectionism, to a certain degree, and for certain countries, works to some extent. The problem is that it doesn't create wealth on a broader basis, and that does come back to haunt the economy after a while. But in the short term, it can seem satisfying to be bringing more jobs in, more investment, that kind of thing. So it may take a while before we get to a point where countries can go beyond their own political reactions domestically and look at what the longer-term interests really are.
Yeah, and in a day and age of social media and the short political cycles, that seems to be quite a challenge.
It does. I mean, it's a challenge in politics generally that you always have to have a short-term view because that's when the next election is. But the interests of the country may well be in a longer-term view and longer-term strategies. And I think that's where we're at now. There is not a clear, coherent, longer-term vision that we're seeing that countries are coalescing around. Every country is kind of going its own way right now.
Yeah. Do you see, of course, climate is a major priority for a lot of governments around the world, and maybe the pendulum might be moving away from that again, but do you see untapped potential in terms of a climate argument for free trade?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why we're kind of losing the power of our trade agreements. They haven't been keeping up with the way that the economy and various other issues have been developing, and climate is one of them. Because countries are investing in preparing for climate change, and that means imposing more costs on their producers in many cases, and those producers are justifiably saying, if I'm spending this much more to address climate change, and these imports that are coming in, countries they're coming from, are not investing that same kind of money, how can I compete fairly? And so I think the world of trade needs to think more about how to incorporate those kinds of elements into the rules that get developed in the future, but there's no sign that that's really starting.
Yeah. Well, I guess Europe's trying carbon border adjustments, and the U.S. is talking about their own version.
Well, yes, and those are certainly efforts that are being undertaken, and they're being undertaken with some other countries too. The problem is it's every country pursuing its own path. Like the U.S. and the EU have tried to converge on a single approach that the two of them could take, which would be helpful in showing leadership, but they're very far apart. And so when you don't have a broader direction to go that other countries can follow, we're all just kind of drifting along in that policy space.
Yeah. Again, taking it back to Canada and Canadian agriculture specifically, if we look at carbon intensity of crops grown in Canada, I think there's a favorable story and probably unrecognized value of Canadian crops globally on that front. To me, that would also be an argument, or would you say that's also an argument in favor of more open trade globally from a climate perspective, that we're not necessarily having, the more protectionism there is, the less likely we are to actually have the right products grown in the right areas from an efficient climate efficiency perspective?
Well, yeah, those are two competing pressures. I think Canada does have a huge advantage because of our environmentally friendly production practices and the kinds of investments we've made and our producers have made. So that should be a selling point around the world because it's helping advance the cause of addressing climate change more broadly. But as you say, if that just runs into blind protectionism that's not even going to be tied to the climate issues, then that's going to frustrate that effort. But we should have a big advantage because we're one of the few net exporters of agricultural products. Combine that with our climate profile, and we should be doing extremely well in the future in those markets.
Okay. Final question then, Steve. We could potentially see a change in government here in Canada as well. We've talked about other countries, but in Canada as well in the next couple of years. Does that, do you think that will have a significant effect on our approach to trade beyond our borders?
Well, at this stage, I don't think it's clear because I don't think I've heard either the Liberals or the Conservatives talking much about a longer-term vision of where we should be going. And I think that's something that's really missing, and I'm hoping that both parties could start to think more about that because I think its importance to the future of Canadian agriculture is difficult to overstate.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your time and your insight again, and look forward to our next conversation, Steve. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was Steve Verheul, former trade negotiator for Canada, providing his perspective on the world trade climate and how Canada tries to steer through some of this right now. No easy task whatsoever. The answer to your above-the-ground nitrogen loss problem is Anvil nitrogen stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anvil dual-active ingredients deliver extended protection, visit kochag.ca. When we come back, we got time for a little bit of top ag news stories of the day.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, we are back here on RealAg Radio. It's now time for the top ag news stories of the day. Dade is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you to maximize yield. To learn more and find your local dealer, visit vaterstad.com. We don't have a lot of time here, so we'll focus on probably the biggest news story of the day, I should say, and that is new info out on Canada and inflation. Okay, so very interesting. The inflation number is below what expectations were. According to the Globe and Mail, the Bank of Canada may be one step closer to cutting interest rates after back-to-back inflation reports showed tight monetary policy is working to cool price increases. Governor Tiff Macklem and his team have kept the bank's policy interest rate at 5% since last summer, waiting for the high borrowing cost to slow economic activity and act as a brake on inflation. So what the Bank of Canada said was that overall inflation fell to 2.8% in February on a year-over-year basis from 2.9% in January and 3.4% in December. I believe that analysts were looking for a 3.1%, so this is definitely below what people thought. When you look at the consumer price index for February across all the provinces, Alberta, one of the highest, 4.2%. Manitoba, actually is the lowest, 0.9%. Canada overall, like I said, was 2.8%. So the two provinces that are are higher than national average is Alberta and Quebec. Quebec at 3.3%. Now, one of the sort of good news, bad news sandwiches out of all this is that the Globe talks about how gasoline prices, Canadians weren't paying that much more at the pump last year compared to February of 2023. In year-over-year terms, gas prices were up just 0.8%, but the jump from January to February of this year was a more palpable 4%. So gasoline on the way up. Prices are on the rise because of what's happening in the oil market. The OPEC Plus group of oil exporting countries recently announced it would extend voluntary supply cuts into the April to June part of the year, a move meant to prop up crude prices. So this is going to add fuel to if you're pushing for the Bank of Canada to be, maybe looking at a rate cut. All along, a lot of the economists I've been reading, there's been a lot of talk about how Canada would probably wait till the Fed moves, but maybe the Bank of Canada is going to have to move before the Fed. Doug Porter, chief economist with BMO Capital Markets, says it's difficult to poke any holes in this report. We're not the only analyst caught by surprise at how modest these inflation rates of the past 2 months have been. The Bank of Canada has projected Q1 inflation to average 3.2% in January monetary policy report, while we are now headed for 2.8%. That's a big and welcome difference, but it is sustained. But is it sustained enough for rate cuts? So that'll be the next thing that everyone's looking at. Is this sustained lowering, or is this just a one-time blip, and will there be some sort of revision? If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Sorry we don't have more time for the top ag news stories of the day today. Just so much trying to get squeezed into this program. I want to thank everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And, of course, we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Barricade 2 Herbicide from FMC. Use Barricade 2 Herbicide for consistent, powerful control of the toughest in-crop weeds without harming your wheat, oats, or barley crop. Barricade 2 Herbicide. Tough on weeds, gentle on crops.